10:39 a.m. Thursday, November 20th, 2025. We are the universe. We are beyond any word or image. And so the reflection, what is our highest vision, and how can we practically ground that in the field, the path, the situations we face, the people that we encounter or that encounter us? Well, imagine someone blindfolding themselves and outside of their city hall with a document of their experience, past, present, or future, not necessarily of themselves, but perhaps ideas, questions, and perhaps there are forms of emergency where there are those who need spiritual, psychological, and as well as physical, biological. And so, the blindfold is a metaphor. So you don't necessarily have to have a blindfold on. You don't have to be blind, in order to allow others to see that you're not judging by appearances. In a world where there is a huge critical entity that is trying to help or push people to identify with the appearances. And so the tall buildings reflect a certain polarity, a certain level of consciousness that can be reconfigured if there is a critical degree of consideration for the universal consciousness. And then the buildings can serve as electromagnetic transmitters for not just the locality, but different parts of the world, or even there's other calibers that we cannot get into, but only. Let me take a step back here. You could also be documenting your experience. You don't have to be holding a document. But anyways, there is a certain type of City Hall is a metaphor, or for that which is within you, in a certain sense, but in practical terms, it is the part of our consciousness that strategizes and executes critical ideas, critical formations, as it interprets in its own perspective that which may not have form. But anyways, in our jobs and our relationships, our responsibilities, is a way of embodying City Hall. It is a building in which pulsates certain elements, but it is also receiving impulses from other institutions that might have greater jurisdiction, that does have greater jurisdiction, but there is some degree of sovereignty with counties and states in respect to the federal here in America, but around the world in different countries it can be different. But essentially, the universal institution that helps govern with the heart. Will allow for sustainable manifestations rather than seeing these buildings having to restart from the ground, which always happens from those movements and entities, societies that have neglected how to prioritize the heart in our day while still implementing the practical guidelines and parameters of the mind and its logic, without going into extremes, into intellectualism, even though there is a place for a variety of different concepts, constructs, through papers and studies and experiments and investigations, even some might say prophecies and revelations, but our spine has a certain amount of importance. So does our teeth on a certain notice. We care about teeth health on a certain degree because when it hurts, we realize, whoa, I could have done things to prevent certain things. But with the spines, some people might have back pain, some people might not have back. You're in the movie. Don't. We are the director. And so, the spine is a delicate instrument, but yet it can withstand many forces. And to a certain degree of attunement, there is a way to achieve most excellent health if we continue to transcend the duality consciousness. What is the duality consciousness? Thinking that a choice we make could be a mistake, meaning that we could not learn anymore from making a choice in which sometimes there is a domino effect. But the question we all have is, how can we allow for our health to be maximized, to be integrated into a genuine cycle in our day-to-day life without feeling that we have to go into extremes? And it may not just be our spine, there could be other parts of our body. But the spine, sitting down or standing too long can have certain effects, or not doing certain exercises. But it's also about states of consciousness. But both are important. One does ultimately affect the other, your consciousness. And if we're trying to support the spine on a certain fundamental level, from having the perfect balance of rest and activity. The aim, I think, can consider the sun when it's at its highest peak as the turning point of a certain cycle. That if we try to meet that point, or the time near that, it doesn't have to, it could be after, but that point being the idea, the ideal and or idea for how we may want to express something very bright, while still acknowledging the magnificent beauty when the sun is rising and setting, the contrast of the shadow and the light beaming together. Is a sacred time. But the will to meet those times is not as important as the will to meet the sun at its highest point in the sky, and our will to create our most precise effort to express what we would like the world to express for us. And as we can consistently meet that cycle every day in our jobs, what would that look like in our jobs? Or our situations? Some may not have a job, but it doesn't necessarily is determined by the amount of money we receive and if we are being employed. But everyone has a role. For this is a theatrical play after all. But City Hall is a place in combination with a place that I've been going to express an alternative to certain predicaments, circumstances involving the world, my community, and my commune. Even though people might regard it as a shelter. So, with this being said, is there anything else that I would like to say? We may not be in the political field, but it does not necessarily mean we can't get into the political field. The practical question is, are we willing to study a critical degree and question what we study to a critical degree of the field in which we are magnetized the most? And we may or may not be pursuing that field. There may not be a yes or no, black or white answer, because situations are sometimes a certain way where it could be mixed. The highest ideal, what is preventing me from taking practical steps to implement that, I'm looking at the building you were looking at, but you guys have a different view. And the practical step is going outside and sharing my presence, and the location being more geometric and symmetrical, resonant to forms based on the Fibonacci. And have ways of sharing more deeply the ideas that I have. But I think that's pretty much all I want to say for now. Sometimes it seems like every day is the same, but at the same time, there are different ideas every day, and this is the way it's going to go. But there's going to be shifts, big shifts at certain intervals, where it will not be the same circumstances. But what can I say? The universal light is the principle of the will to explore consciousness while maintaining discernment and judgment from those polarities that try to put down or remove, label as less than what is the essence within every heart, even if it is just a dim spark, and that spark may, in some sense, have ran out of opportunity and is reintegrated into the oversoul. Hitler, Mao, Stalin, I said Mao, but there are others who are losing their opportunity to either keep their spark of their soul, or sometimes they are moved to a lesser evolution where there are other planets that are going through a lower degree, even though some people might say, how can things get any worse here on Earth? You're just speaking from a position of privilege. You're not in Yemen, you're not in the Congo, you're not in Ukraine or Gaza. You're not a homeless person in a so-called first world country. You are not, well, and there's other types of masqueraded camouflaged suffering, and the entertainment industry and other institutions have a lot of masqueraded so-called happiness and contentment, comfortability, without trying to help humanity in a certain way that continues to question the foundations that suggest the resources of the earth are not owned by all of the people, rather than by a select few who want more money. A select few people or organizations or corporations, or what are we talking here? There's also a metaphysical component. But anyways, but whenever we share ourselves genuinely, we can create an interdependent radiation that travels beyond contrast, beyond so-called points. And distance. But for practical purposes, for my back, I'm going to teleport through the time machine. If the past will be acknowledged for what it is, then the parameters of the future can be aligned and attuned to the best possible degree, even though it often may not be based on our expectations. We surrender the need to have our validation defined by anything on the outside. Who do I speak for when I say we? Take care, O universal light within the heart of all of you who are listening to this. Let freedom ring.